welcome back to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Showcase. Well, we have a very exciting module to talk about now, A329, the making of Welsh history. Now, this may not be something that you originally think, yes, that's definitely the one I'm going to do, but let me tell you the best thing about this module before I introduce our next guest. It has a dissertation, and it's excellent if you're interested in postgraduate study, and I know that a lot of students out there at level 1 were thinking about postgraduate study, thinking about how to bridge that gap this morning, and this is but one way of doing so. Karl Hack, welcome to the studio, and thank you for joining us today to talk about this module. Now, it is about Welsh history, but you don't have to be Welsh to enjoy the module, do you? Even take it.
Well, definitely not. Because many of the materials, or most of the materials, will be online, it wouldn't actually matter whether you were in California or Cardiff. So if you are Welsh, or you have Welsh family, or you're living in Wales, of course, that might be one reason to take it.
But you're using Wales as, I guess, a central material, aren't you, to explore history effectively?
Yeah, it's a little bit as if you're... Though it is about Wales and it will give you a good spread of Welsh history from medieval to present day, it's a way of looking at themes such as national identity, heritage, industrialisation, and if you like, if you're interested in any of the developments of nationalism in Ireland or Scotland or around the UK, this would be another way of getting at those.
We've been speaking a lot about criticality and how important that is a skill. How does this module then give you a chance to really explore that skill and develop it at third level?
Criticality? Do you mean criticality in terms of use of sources?
Yeah, and also being critical, so adopting a critical approach, critical evaluation, as well as, I guess, using different sources, which would be very relevant to this.
OK. Criticality in terms of arguments and propositions. The binding theme of the module is identity, or identities plural, in Wales. So throughout the module, we're asking questions about how far did a Welsh identity actually exist at a particular time, as opposed to, say, it being distributed in different principalities and localities. How far is what's going on driven by distinctively Welsh aspects versus British aspects, or even people being part of a world labour movement or a religious movement. So there's that constant tension. It's though Welsh nationalism, Welsh identity is there, it's also about those different layerings of identities, which is very relevant for the modern globalised world and the sort of issues that come up with Brexit and so on. How far are we global? How far are we British? How can we be several different things at one time?
Excellent. So grappling with some very, very big issues that students would get involved with. Now, I'd mentioned earlier that one of the key things that would appeal to students is this dissertation, which is a 6,000-word dissertation right at the end. I think that's a great selling point.
Well, I'd hope so. The module fits into 2 parts. There are 15 weeks of content, which in 5 blocks takes you across from the Middle Ages to present day. And then the entire rest of the module is given over to the dissertation. So the advantage of this is it gives you a chance to study something in depth. You know, understandably at the OU, many of our modules are vast. You can do the entire of empires from 1500 to virtually present day. But here, because you're looking just at Wales, and it gives it a focus, it will allow you to study something in depth. You could take a heritage site, you could take a town, you could take an event, you could take a particular industry or a particular aspect of gender studies and use mostly online materials to study that with some time to develop it. And of course, we will be developing all of the skills you need hand in hand throughout the module. You won't just be left to your own devices.
Excellent. So the first part you've said is all online, and this is a very integrated experience for students. Can you tell us about what students might expect in terms of how they're presented things on the learning environment and how they get to do collaborative activities, engage with their tutor groups? So what sort of connections might they make and how might they engage with that material?
Yeah, it's strange in one way. If you've done an OU course, when you go to the materials online, they're not going to look that different. You're going to be used to the way things are done. On the other hand, we do have a very particular approach to it. So, for instance, when you do an exercise, because it's all designed online, you might, for instance, be given a choice of people to do a brief report on, an autobiographical report of 50 words or 100 words. And then you might post that directly onto the online material so you can share it, and optionally others might be able to comment on it. And we encourage all comment to be as an adding to, helping. There's no sense of criticality in that anyway. So what you're getting there is co-education as well as education. You've got your tutors, you've got the materials, but by combining your different work, it gives you a huge range of different options, material, voices. So we're hoping that will be both familiar but also different, and it's by combining everything, you get far more learning done.
And giving and receiving feedback is such an important skill and something people can really benefit from. And maybe they haven't done up to this point in that level of putting their own work up somewhere and commenting on others' work.
I think the word feedback can be dangerous. I don't know quite what we'd term it. The point is you're not giving feedback, criticising somebody's work. It might be that you've used this example of a person. Well, actually, I found something else about them. Or you used a definition and there's a way we can improve that definition. So we're very, very strongly emphasising throughout the module that it's how you add to other people's comments. And there are some marks associated with your contributions to other people. But the way it's done is strictly that you're marked on how you assist them in concrete ways. And we provide examples, as I've said, adding a little bit to a definition, giving another example of a place that you've come across that contrasts to somebody else's. So it's very much about co-education, learning together. There's no group work in the sense you're marked as a team. You're marked on what you do. And certainly nothing of the element of marking people, criticising. It's helping, co-education, co-learning with the tutors alongside all the time.
And you've designed this for a nice sized cohort, haven't you? I guess students might learn to recognise other students and become a community of learners.
I've got to be careful here. I don't want to talk my module to a smaller size. Inevitably, because we're choosing a fairly defined topic, it is Welsh history. Even if Welsh history in the sense of not studying the pond, but studying the world in a pond, using it as a window to things. So we would imagine, yes, it would be a smaller cohort than most modules people at the OU were used to, and that, yes, you ought to be able to get to know most people by name. And the interactive component should mean there is a genuine sense of community, which you, with the best will in the world, you can't really have on a module of 200, 400 or even 4,000.
Now, we spoke a little bit about the dissertation earlier, but there are also the 3 TMAs in the first 15 weeks of the module that people can also enjoy as part of the formative work that builds up then to that dissertation. Can you tell us a little bit about what might be in those TMAs? You've mentioned some of the postings and things that people could do. But is there anything else about assessment that's worth including?
The TMAs fall into 2 categories again. The first 2 TMAs are based on the content. So, for instance, the first TMA gives you a chance to compare 2 primary sources, which of course is a skill you need if you're going to write a dissertation. The second TMA gives you a chance to compare 2 secondary sources. And then the third TMA, you get to write, with the assistance of your tutor in terms of selecting a topic, a proposal for a dissertation. The fourth TMA, people post their first chapter and you get a very small mark for how you comment and help and assist 1 or 2 people on developing that introduction. But throughout it, yes, there is a small component of marks attributed for how you help people. In the first TMA, that's just for how you comment in the online activities. And again, it's a very proactive, positive sort of marking. If you assist people a bit, you get a reasonable mark. If you assist people a lot, or there's some very good points, you get a very good mark. That's the spirit of it. So your tone and what you contribute. And that increases that element of being marked either on your comments on other people or your reflections on what they've said to you throughout. The idea is that by the time you're commenting on somebody else's introduction, you're thoroughly used to this, thoroughly relaxed about this, and you're just acting as part of a community helping each other. So yes, it starts with a very kind of low risk, low weight, you've helped someone tick, through to now you're actually helping someone in a substantive, if modest way.
Excellent. That sounds really nicely structured for students. We asked our audience about identity, and this is one thing I'd like to turn to now because we've covered the assessment and we've talked a little bit about how it's all structured and what people might do. So this is the big sort of theme. So we asked people which identity has been more powerful in Wales since the 19th century, Welsh or Britishness. Would you like to see what they said?
Go ahead.
OK. So the results are 70%, we're moving all the time, 70% have said Welsh identity and 30% British identity. What would you have expected, Karl?
70% said Welsh identity.
Which identity has been more powerful in Wales? Welsh identity.
I don't know what I'd have expected, but it's quite an interesting answer. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of our module, in the Middle Ages, there isn't a single Wales. There's only a single Welsh principality, very briefly, when the rulers of Gwynedd actually unify Wales in the 13th century. So this isn't to deny what they're saying, but if you look at the module, you'll start to think, well, at various points, British, Welsh, I suppose to be fair though, you gave them a binary choice, didn't you?
There is a binary choice. It did go down though. It was higher earlier on and then
higher in terms of Welsh identity.
Yes, and it's decreased a little bit as we were talking.
That is interesting. Yeah. A globalised world, and people are saying what's driving people's, but this is their identity, you're saying.
It is their identity. Well, let's break it down a bit, because one of the other questions we asked was what was the most influential element of a modern Welsh identity, and there are more choices here. So we have ancestry, language, shared history, territory, or customs and tradition. So let's see what they said. Here we have 40% now saying language is the most influential element of a Welsh identity, and then customs and traditions at 30%. The others are at 10% now. That's been moving, and language was higher earlier on as well, which is interesting. I mean, Wales is slightly different in that sense that the language, depending on where you are, can be a very important part of identity.
Yeah, I'm sure if you'd have only held your poll in Aberystwyth or only in Cardiff, you might have got very different results there. You didn't say which language, did you?
No.
Yeah, obviously for some people, language will be a primary marker. I thought what was interesting about that, what struck me immediately actually, is that territory, or I would have put it as landscape location, came very low down.
And ancestry.
And ancestry, I suppose. But when you think of some of the quite tight-knit, or what were once tight-knit Welsh communities, I'm surprised that sense of location and territory doesn't come up slightly higher. I mean, some of the valleys would have very different identities from other valleys, but
yeah. It's interesting. We had in fact, if you're interested in watching the catch-up from the Brexit discussion, we had a really interesting talk about geographical boundaries and identity. So if this is an area you're interested in, you can check that out on the catch-up page on the website. Okay, so very interesting, I guess, aspects to explore and thrash out in terms of the identity. But you've got 5 blocks in the module, and I wonder briefly if we could sort of go through the things that people might learn in those in the first part of the module. So block 1 is on conflict and coexistence in medieval Wales.
Yes, and this is the period when you go from having a multiplicity of Welsh principalities, where often them different rulers are murdering, killing, trying to steal each other's land, through the Norman invasions, occupation, whatever you want to call it, and settlements, and the establishment of the March territories, so where you have independent, powerful laws. Right through that process of Welsh gentry and Welsh having to grapple with that, how far do we adapt to Norman ways? So we talked earlier, or I made reference to Gwynedd and the rulers of Gwynedd uniting Wales in the 13th century. But when they unite Wales, how far do they do that almost as Norman lords? that they're using Norman ideas of feudalism or power, how far do they use that to promote Welsh identity with Welsh poetry, Welsh literature, and so on? So there are huge questions of conflict and coexistence for that period.
The next block takes a look then at religion and society in early modern Wales.
Yes, and a bit more than religion. This is the period in early modern Wales when the last of the Great Welsh revolts are defeated. You have the Acts of Union, as they tend to be called, which make England and Wales one administratively. So religion is a way of looking at how different Welsh identities emerge, the emergence of baptism, of Methodism and so on, which don't become predominant in this period, but certainly challenge the dominance of, say, an English-dominated Church of England. And it's also a way of getting at things such as culture, the increase of literature and education through church-supported schools or education.
Block 4 then is about Wales in flux, industrialisation and migration.
Yes, so you have the Middle Ages, you have the early modern period. I feel we've missed something here. We've missed block 3 out.
No, block 3 I think is Wales in flux. That's according to my notes.
Yes,
then,
block 3, okay.
Yes.
So block 3 is industrialisation, urbanisation and migration, people.
Yeah.
So you're talking industries. Yeah. You know, the rise of coal is used as an example, but that's used also to open windows up and say you could do dissertations on slate or transport or other industries. The emergence of towns where we look particularly at Cardiff at one point, but again, it's a way of saying this is something you could do with other towns, whether it's Swansea or Neath or smaller places. And finally, those migrations movements, both into Wales, around Wales, and out of Wales, how do they affect, change Welsh identity? Because you have huge movements both from England to Wales, from Wales abroad and into London, and within Wales. So identities and where people are shifting hugely over this period.
The next 2 blocks are all about identity, and I can see how this would appeal to so many different groups of students because you're looking at conflict, religion, industrialisation, migration, and then the next blocks are both about identities. The block 4 is class and protest and new identities. And block 5 is about making identities in modern Wales. So very nicely structured in terms of some of the key things that you could see how they would weave through. Yeah,
block 4 is structured around protest, especially. So you have very different types of protest. Everything from the Rebecca riots with people dressing up as women to smash up turnpike gates and attack powers that have raised their taxes, through to the early industrial protests and the building of the union movement, which will build that great kind of Welsh labour identity. So in that particular block, you'll have elements of the rural protest, the origins of the labour identity, as well as the period when Wales has a very liberal identity in Parliament, leading up to Lloyd George, of course, being Prime Minister. So it gets those big themes into it, as well as the protests being quite interesting. And again, you have that element of criticality. What's going on? The Rebecca riots, how far are they a very Welsh thing? How far, by comparison, should they be seen as a movement of rural protests that spread wider around all of England? This is a period of labourers burning hayricks in parts of England and a great fear of uprising. So those questions work into it as well.
Is there anything you want to say about block 5? Because I think you've touched a lot on identity and this whole theme running through there. But is there anything we could end with on that block? I think you've covered so much, Karl. It sounds such an interesting and varied module.
Block 5 is almost looking back, not quite. So block 5 allows us to say how in the past 150 years have people written about and thought about Welsh identity. Whether it's in attempts to resurrect a bardic movement and Eisteddfods and a cultural revival feeding through into the politics as well, or it's literature, or it's heritage sites. And that feeds into current day contests over Welsh identity and politics. So we're hoping that's both, to an extent, looking back and wrapping it up together, and also exciting, obviously, in its own right.
Karl Hack, thank you very much for filling us in on that module. And it sounds very exciting. I'm sure students will look forward to doing it.
We'll look forward to having them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that ends that session. Join us in a few minutes after this next video, which is an MA Creative Writing. This is the first session that we're looking at the level 2 of the Masters programmes. So I'll be back with Derek Neal in a couple of minutes. See you then.